The biblical book of Exodus opens with the Jewish people far from home, enslaved in Egypt. Worked brutally, starved, and smothered in despair, God's people had long cried out for liberation. To bring the Jews out of Egypt, God tasked Moses to speak on his behalf to win their liberation, and then to lead the people to freedom in a promised land of their own. Having been driven out of Egypt as a fallen prince revealed to be a Jewish slave, Moses was drawn to the moment of his divine charge by an extraordinary sight. It was a sight Moses couldn't identify with certainty in the distance up the side of the mountain. It was a sight so unbelievable that Moses found himself compelled to investigate. It was a sight described in the 3rd chapter of Exodus. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire from the midst of a bush. So he looked, and behold, the bush was burning with fire, but the bush was not consumed. The sight that leads Moses to his moment of destiny is that of a bush on fire. Engulfed in flame, common sense tells us this bush will certainly burn itself into ash. It will be consumed by the flames. And yet, as the story in Scripture makes it clear, the bush was not consumed. Despite the fire, the bush remains intact. After this supernatural wonder is briefly described in the scriptural text, Moses hears the voice of the angel of the Lord. The conversation between God and Moses, in which Moses is commanded to return to Egypt to free the Jewish people, takes the focus of the narrative. The burning bush isn't given another thought or mention. Was the burning bush just an inexplicable guise God uses to impress upon Moses the power behind his new mission? Or does the burning bush as a physical metaphor for God himself contain a hint of a deeper truth about our universe? The liberation narrative that follows this first meeting between God and Moses is regularly punctuated by a series of supernatural miracles, including plagues and pestilence, the pillar of fire, and the parting of the Red Sea. But the first of this chain of miracles was the burning bush. In this episode of the Temporal Reverie, I want to take a closer look at the burning bush. What clearly presents itself as an extraordinary event, giving evidence of divine presence, might also be much more. The particular form of this supernatural occurrence might tell us something deeply significant about an ongoing process that shapes the universe at this very moment. You can associate several meanings to the audience of Moses before the burning bush. First and most obvious is to symbolize revelation itself. God reveals himself to Moses through the distinct and unforgettable manifestation of the burning bush. The voice of God emerges from it, making plain to Moses that God is no idle daydream, no silent advisor, no mere wishful thought. After the encounter with the burning bush, Moses walks with the certainty of one who more than believes. Moses walks in the wake of God revealed. But the burning bush brings more than one kind of revelation to Moses. Not only does God reveal himself to Moses as being real and present, he also reveals to Moses a calling and mission to lead the Jewish people out of slavery in Egypt and into a promised land flowing with milk and honey. And though it's not yet clear at this point in the story, the burning bush is the first in a chain of miracles associated with the exodus of the Jews from Egypt. From the moment the infant Moses was set adrift on the Nile River in a woven basket to avoid a death sentence, to his rearing as a prince in the Egyptian royal court, to the discovery of his Hebrew origins and subsequent fall from privilege, to his banishment from Egypt, the story of Moses has been incredible. It's a story of political intrigue, of family secrets, of shifting allegiances, of property and power, all very dramatic, with surprise twists. But nothing of the story of Moses, from childhood to exile, contained a single miracle. The appearance of the burning bush on the side of the mountain was meant to be more than eye-catching and attention-grabbing to a lone shepherd tending his flock. It marked the point when God was revealed to Moses, when God's liberation mission for the Jews in bondage was also revealed, and when supernatural miracles began appearing in the Exodus story. The burning bush in Exodus is obviously a symbol for divine revelation. In addition to revelation, the burning bush also marks the beginning of increasingly more astonishing miracles to mark key points in the Exodus story. From comparatively simple demonstrations when first arriving at the court of Pharaoh, to a string of plagues, to the deaths of the Egyptian firstborn, to the parting of the Red Sea, what follows the burning bush is a mission that frequently calls upon miracles to turn up the pressure on Pharaoh and secure freedom for the former Hebrew slaves. So placed within the bigger picture of the liberation of the Hebrews from Egypt, The encounter with the burning bush is a transformative experience that brings a major revelation of divine truth as a catalyst for a journey toward liberation and miracles. To consider a deeper meaning within the particular form chosen by God when he revealed himself to Moses, let's start with examining the standout feature of this phenomenon, the thing that clearly conveys to Moses that he is faced with unimaginable supernatural power, the paradox at the heart of the burning bush. The bush doesn't really burn. Moses doesn't give us much in the way of a description of what he encounters. However, the scripture does say that the bush was burning with fire, but was not consumed. The everyday experience of our common sense tells us immediately that what Moses witnesses is not possible. Ever since bestowing the secret of fire on humanity by Prometheus, we've had a very long history with fire. And like most any phenomenon commonly found in our world, human science has delved deeply into understanding what transpires when something burns. In purely scientific terms, combustion is a high-temperature chemical reaction between oxygen and a fuel. When the temperature gets high enough for the particular fuel on hand and the amount of oxygen available, ignition occurs. The heat output gets great enough that the reaction gives off light in the form of flames. Dry wood, capable of burning automatically, ignites at temperatures in the range of 800 to 900 degrees Fahrenheit. The reaction produces tremendous change in the chemical composition and physical structure of the fuel, leaving only smoldering embers and a former husk of the once unburned fuel in the form of ashes. These ashes can't support their own weight, causing them to collapse in a dusty heap. In the case of a bush, nearly all the physical mass of the plant can provide fuel for a combustion reaction. Trunk, branches, and leaves all burn, and therefore can be entirely reduced by the combustion process into ash. Only when the reaction has converted all the available fuel into ash does the process burn itself out due to lack of fuel. Once set aflame, a bush only burns for so long. In due course, the fire burns out, and the bush is reduced to embers. The bush is consumed by the flames. According to Wikipedia, the combustion of solid fuels, such as those supplied in the plant matter of a bush, consists of three fairly distinct phases that each overlaps with the next. First is the preheating phase. The unburned fuel heats up first to its flash point and then its fire point. Flammable gases are released by the fuel into the air. Then comes the distillation phase. The mix of flammable gases and oxygen ignites. Energy is released as heat and light, often producing flames. Generated heat maintains the production of chemical vapors. And then finally the charcoal phase. The output of the flammable gases from the fuel drops off, becoming too low to persist flames. The charred fuel burns slowly, giving off only glows and later only smolders. Clearly, combustion is a very energetic process that produces significant and rapid changes in whatever burns. If you or I ever came upon a brush fire, we'd never give a second thought to how the process would turn out for the bush. Its destruction would be a foregone conclusion. So a burning bush is quickly consumed, unless it is not. Such would seem to be the case with the bush Moses finds engulfed in flames, and from which he hears the voice of the angel of the Lord. As the scripture makes quite explicit, this particular bush, although engulfed in fire, is not consumed. Flammable gases from the fuel, the bush itself, are somehow released and ignite in the presence of heat and oxygen, but the destruction of the bush simply does not take place. Taken at face value, what the book of Exodus describes is impossible. The appearance of the burning bush is possible only by way of a miracle. Would this particular miracle be something God chose to show off his power as he appears to Moses? It's certainly an impressive, attention-grabbing display of divine power. But is the specific form of this singular miracle arbitrary? Or was it perhaps chosen by God as a way to reveal something particular to human beings about the nature of reality? Does the very form of the burning bush itself convey a secret? What might such a secret possibly be? And how does the burning bush provide a tantalizing hint of that secret right in plain sight where it has been waiting thousands of years to be found and understood? The hint is perhaps revealed in the very heart of the paradox that defines the burning bush. If we take the phenomenon at face value, what we know about the natural universe leads us to the crux of the clue we seek. The bush is described as engulfed in fire. The presence of flames is evidence that the process of combustion is taking place, meaning that the branches and leaves are reacting with heat and oxygen in a way that should destroy the bush. Given those conditions, how could the bush not be consumed? How could the bush not burn up and the fire that consumed it soon after burn out? By what means could the bush possibly remain unconsumed, intact, and whole, while simultaneously releasing heat and light in the form of flames? If combustion is the process by which we expect the burning bush to be consumed, then the only remotely rational way for it to persist unconsumed is for it to be uncombusted. The change that the combustion reaction produced in the branches and leaves is not halted or prevented, it is undone. Yes, undone, like clicking undo in a word processor or the back button in a web browser. The damage inflicted upon the bush by the fire is reversed, millisecond by millisecond, one sliver of time after the next. In the very instant the condition of the bush is compromised by the combustion process, that destruction is replaced by the original state of wholeness the bush was presumed to have before the fire ignited. Similarly, the bush undergoes combustion that proceeds to break it down into ash, as well as the instantaneous restoration of that ash to original, undamaged living condition, destroyed and created again, non-stop, over and over and over again, 1,000, 1,000,000, 1,000,000,000 times a second. The burning bush is kept intact by divine will. The sustained creative power through which God endows all of reality with its moment-by-moment conditions and defines the manner in which all of reality behaves. But why would the deeper imagining of the burning bush be at all relevant to the understanding of miracles more broadly? What hint might be found in the realization that the bush burns but never burns up, because the bush is being continuously recreated? Perhaps what's plainly true about the burning bush is secretly true about every single thing in our universe. Not that the universe is engulfed in fire, but rather that everything that exists is being kept in existence because it is being created over and over and over again, second by second, hour by hour, day by day. If everything exists in a constant state of continuous creation, willfully altering the state of reality might become possible if you could define how the universe gets recreated. The burning bush is the first miracle in the story of the Israelites escaping slavery in Egypt. From that point in the story to the point where Pharaoh relents and frees the former slaves, the miracles in the story are demonstrations of God's power and displeasure. Their nature is dictated by the purpose, which is to ratchet up the suffering experienced by the Egyptians and thereby increase the pressure on Pharaoh. After the point in the story when the Israelites gather themselves and their belongings and flee Egypt, the miracles continue, but their nature and purpose are different. The miracles that take place between the departure from Egypt and when Moses returns from an audience with God to receive the Ten Commandments are miracles of protection. In the Cecil B. DeMille film, The Ten Commandments, the Israelites at the shore of the Red Sea are prevented from pursuit of Pharaoh's vengeful army by a pillar of fire. That's not quite how Exodus describes it. And the Lord went before them by day in a pillar of cloud to lead the way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light as to go day and night. He did not take away the pillar of cloud by day or the pillar of fire by night from before the people. In the scriptural narrative, it was a long journey from Egypt to the Red Sea, so God led the Israelites by producing moving pillars of cloud and fire. And when they found themselves seemingly trapped against the sea, the pillar of cloud moved from the front of the Israelites to take up positions at the rear in order to block Pharaoh before Moses parts the Red Sea. These pillars offer an interesting bookend of sorts to the symbol of the burning bush. All these phenomena have in common the presentation of natural processes, such as fire or clouds, expressing itself in unnatural ways. The burning bush produces flames without consuming the fuel of the bush. The pillar of fire produces flames out of thin air without any fuel to burn. The burning bush displays the miracle of restoration, of wholeness restored in the face of destructive forces. The pillar of fire displays the miracle of materialization in which fuel might form out of nothing in just enough quantity to sustain the fire. While those who don't believe in the God of the three major monotheistic faiths might likely consider such an interpretation a delusion, For people like me who embrace belief in God and who consider the universe a work of divine creation, acceptance of the burning bush is entirely consistent with our theology as established by the creation stories in Genesis. A divine being, one who has a consciousness of sufficient complexity, vastness, and power to bring the entire universe into being from the fabric of consciousness itself, casting that background source of being into illusions we know as space and time and matter and energy, could remake something as easily as it was made in the first place. With no particular difficulty or effort, in fact, we might suppose that recreating a tiny piece of the universe is no effort at all in comparison with treating the entire universe ex nihilo, created from nothing. Among the many names and descriptions given to God are those we have historically given to royalty and rulers: King of Kings, Lord of Hosts. Personally, I tend to shy away from such names because, as a liberal Christian, I tend to be sensitive to sexist, patriarchal language. But those names do convey a sense of complete dominion that believers tell themselves God wields. Along those lines, while I steer clear of king to refer to God, I do like the name sovereign. One of the reasons I like the name sovereign is because of a connection between that word and political philosophy. Of course, in that context, the word has a somewhat different meaning. The idea of a sovereign is more an attribute of the state than any individual who occupies that role and who exercises that authority. Political philosopher Giorgio Agamben famously offered his definition of a sovereign as the one who can proclaim a state of exception. This political state of exception is when a sovereign declares when the public good is best achieved by actions contrary to the rule of law or not contemplated by the law, but which nevertheless demand being undertaken in the face of imminent threat. The sovereign has the power to call forth such a state of exception in which custom and law may be put aside as revealed by the circumstances for the sake of letting something extraordinary take place. Proclaiming a state of exception in politics is done to transcend the constraints of the law for special purpose. Proclaiming a state of exception in the next shape the universe takes when it gets recreated is done to transcend the limits of the so-called laws of nature for special purpose. Like pasting a word into a word processor to replace a misspelling, or by overriding the pattern of letters in the document with a different pattern of letters, the power of miracles is the power to overwrite the existing pattern of reality with any set of conditions you like, regardless of whether or not those conditions could ever happen on their own. The significance of a universe that is constantly being recreated is that it provides an endless, non-stop stream of opportunities to change the conditions of reality. You never have to wait long for the universe's next moment of recreation in the hope that you can influence the recreation process and thereby impose on the newly recreated universe any shape you like. Perhaps the best definition I've ever heard of a miracle is offered by a movie character who says a miracle is something that seems impossible but happens anyway. Miracles happen anyway, despite the odds, regardless of the impossibilities, without a concern or care for the laws of nature. Miracles interrupt the expected flow of reality, imposing something onto a situation or a moment that has no way of happening out of the natural, normal progression of cause and effect. Miracles are possible because the structure and architecture of reality allows for them. The grand cosmic drama of our universe, imagined and brought into being by the divine mind, has written into its defining schema the means to declare a state of exception. As I've said previously, I believe what are commonly considered unbendable laws of nature to be essentially default programming for reality, a collection of automatic behaviors put in place that the discipline of science has labored to decode from theory and experimentation. I also believe that this default programming can be interrupted, altered, reshaped by imposition of an arbitrary set of conditions on reality by a sufficiently enlightened consciousness. The very same process by which our normal reality operates and manifests the universe in its moment-by-moment state is the same process that can and will accept requests to overrule the default behavior so that any situation that you can imagine can be materialized. But to overrule the default behavior, you need to understand how the cycle of the recreated universe works. The first thing to realize in understanding this cycle is that a universe that is constantly being recreated is also one that is constantly being destroyed. Next time, on the Temporal Reverie, I want to dig a bit deeper into the subject of miracles by considering the meaning of the supernatural. Anti-religious partisans use this word as a slam, an indictment of phenomena they consider too preposterous to take seriously. What if our reality, our nature, is a layer of interaction that turns out to be a subset of a larger nature, a supernature, where new dynamics and forces might be found that account for the occult and the workings of the truly supernatural? It's often said that Scripture finds its relevance at any point along human history because we not only make its stories part of ours, but also make our story a part of the Scripture. We see things we want to find in these texts in order to find comfort and reassurance in our notions of life and the universe. We find these things in Scripture because we bring them to Scripture. I'd like to know what you think about this episode. Please leave any questions or thoughts you'd like to share in the comments below. My thanks to God for this chance to share with all of you, and may the gifts of love, joy, peace, and enlightenment come to you all.